counseling as well as group counseling. We have a shelter that we run that operates at about full capacity all year round, about 30 odd bed shelter that primarily goes to women and children in need of immediate services. We also partner with local hotels for men if a man needs to be removed from his home and put in a safe place. We also, one of our cool things we do is legal advocacy. So we have a very well-educated staff that helps with our clients' legal needs. So whether that's getting a divorce, getting a protective order against an abusive spouse, helping work with CPS to get kids back in safe homes. So we offer a wide variety of services. Those are just some of them. Our department is the Prevention, Education, and Awareness Program, and what we do is we go around to largely schools and talk about healthy relationships with kids. What we know is that if you start talking to kids early about these things in relationships, we prevent domestic violence and abuse later on in life. So that's primarily our job, is we spend a lot of time going from pre-K to 12th grade, talking with kids at age-appropriate levels about things like healthy relationships, boundaries, consent, bodies, inappropriate touches, what to do if you have ever been abused, things like that. So both Taylor and I, we work in the same department, and that's kind of what we do. And so today here we're kind of talking to y'all about teens with disabilities and healthy relationships, because that can kind of be a tough bridge to cross sometimes for some parents and for anyone who interacts with teens on that level. Okay. So we're first going to start with kind of the scope of what we're dealing with, right? So we know that individuals with disabilities are about 2 to 3 times more likely to experience violent victimizations, both as adolescents and as adults, right? That's 2 to 3 times more than the average individual without a disability, right? And we know women and girls face this type of violence more than boys as well. Part of that is due to some of the systemic nature of sexism in our culture, where often women are viewed as kind of second class to men. And we also know that more than 1 in 5 young people between the ages of 12 and 19 report experiencing violence, right? So that's more than twice the rate of youth without a disability, right? And we know just in general that in Texas, 1 in 3 teens are going to experience some kind of relationship violence before they hit the age of 20, right? So these numbers are just compounding onto an already staggering amount of teens who face relationship violence before they're even into adulthood, okay? So we're going to look at some of the vulnerability factors, why teens with disabilities are more at risk for experiencing violence in their relationships, right? One of them is kind of our society's view on ableism, right? Where if you are able-bodied, you are seen as more valuable in society, right? This kind of stereotypical dehumanization of people with disabilities, whether it be physical or cognitive or any such, right?
Another thing that plays into ableism too is I think a lot of people desexualize individuals who have who are living with some sort of disability, and so parents or teachers, other people who get to know these teens might not be discussing relationships with them, right? So if they don't have that knowledge, then they might not know like what a healthy relationship looks like, red flags to look for, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of this desexualization idea that people with disabilities are somehow less than people without disabilities, right? Another factor could be social relationships or isolation, right? People with disabilities may have a harder time, depending on what their disability is, forming relationships with other people that might help them get resources if they are in trouble or if they do need help, right? We know that in traditional domestic violence, isolation of a spouse is one of the key warning signs or one of the key factors that we know to look for in domestic violence, because when you're isolated, you can't access outside resources, you can't ask for help, you may not be able to get away from abuse that may be happening, you may not have the money to get yourself to somewhere safe, right? So we know that depending on the disability, isolation may be a tough one to overcome, and so that's just another vulnerability factor. That kind of ties into lack of access to resources. Depending on what the disability is, you may not be able to leave your house and drive to somewhere safe. You may not have access to money where you could buy like a bus ticket or ride the bus even. You may not know how to get on the bus and how to ride the bus. You may not know where to go, right? You may not know how to use the phone or call for help or use the computer, right? So lack of access to resources to enable to get you help or a lack of resources that the perpetrator knows that you can't access. So they may know that you can't go and ask for help because you don't have the educational awareness to know this is something that shouldn't be happening. We also have underreporting. So domestic violence and sexual assault in general are incredibly underreported crimes. Some of that has to do with the shame. There's a lot of different factors that do that, but some of that might be the shame of being abused and feeling like you somehow contributed to it or caused it. Some of it's maybe just family relations. We keep this inside the family. We don't talk about it outside of this home. You don't tell people about it. So underreporting is common in general amongst any kind of abusive crime, but particularly with individuals with disabilities, right? A disabled person may not know, or a person with a disability may not know this is something that shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be in contact with a person like this. Or they may not know that what's happening is wrong in that kind of way. Or they may not have the ability to verbalize it or speak it or communicate it to someone who could help them. And the people who are around them may not know to ask questions about what's going on. They may not know, oh, what's this relationship like with this person? They may not know those things. Victims to societal stereotypes, that kind of goes back to our talk about ableism, right? So people with disabilities are primarily characterized as having no sexuality or having no concept of relationships. So that kind of makes them a more vulnerable population because we don't think of them in that context generally, right? Same kind of goes with devalued by society. People may not think that they are going to be victims because we can't see them being victims, right? And perceived lack of credibility, depending on what the disability is, people may have a hard time believing that abuse did occur. This kind of ties in with societal stereotypes about people with disabilities being unable to really access reality or unable to communicate what exactly happened. They may be confused, they may not know what's going on. So a perceived lack of credibility in that you don't really know what happens, we know what's best for you, it's okay, we'll handle it, right? So they may be dismissed, not believed, or not even asked. And so now we're going to kind of talk about how to talk with your teen about relationships. What do relationships look like? What are relationships? Right? And so oftentimes we kind of assume, or I'll say society assumes, that people with disabilities aren't really looking for relationships. We don't kind of see them in that light. Right? But what we do know is that people with disabilities, with or without disabilities, generally want that connection, want some kind of connection, want some kind of relationship. Right? So the first thing is to normalize your child's feelings about relationships, whatever they may be. Whether they want to seek out a relationship, whether they're fine by themselves. Normalizing what's going on with your child and identifying those feelings. What are they? Are you feeling anxious about a relationship, scared? Are you excited for one, hopeful for one? What feelings are those? And to generalize those and say those feelings are normal. Right? You also don't want to assume that your child might know something because of their age. Right? So we want to make sure that the language that you use is appropriate for what your child actually knows. We don't want to make assumptions that says, oh, because you're 15, you must know about how sex works, how reproduction works, what's dating like. So you want to make sure that you talk your child through it in a way that they feel comfortable knowing it. So you don't want to make assumptions that, oh, they know what a date looks like. They know how to ask someone out. They know what it's like to go on a date with a person. Right? Ideally, and this is ideally, of course, and ideally rarely works in the world we live in, but ideally you want to start talking about relationships before your child enters into one. This may help prevent future problems down the line. It may help clarify some questions or confusion your child may have. So ideally you want to start talking about it before they start dating, but if that's not possible, there's always ways to go about that. And then in school, we are often taught the golden rule, which is treat someone as you would want to be treated. We kind of changed that up and changed it to the new golden rule, or we call it the platinum rule, which is treat someone how they want to be treated, right? My experiences may be totally different from someone else's, and if I treat Taylor like I want to be treated, that may be disregarding how she actually wants to be treated, right? So it's important to recognize that just because someone that you like or someone that you may date is like you, that doesn't mean they're exactly like you and they're their own person. They get to decide how they want to be treated. We're going to give them the choice, the autonomy to make decisions for themselves, rather than saying, this is my feelings, this must be how you're feeling as well.
We see this a lot with people who have differences in levels of affection, right? So some people might be a really affectionate person. They love to be hugged, give hugs. They want to, like cuddle while they're watching TV, hold hands in public, like PDA is a big one, right? And not everyone is that way. Some people are they have much like firmer boundaries around those things. So you can have conversations no matter what age your child or teen is at about that, right? It doesn't have to be about sex if they're younger. It can be about, mommy doesn't like to, snuggle on the couch when it's hot outside. I'm feeling sweaty, I'm feeling hot, I need my space. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that I don't love you. This is an appropriate time for snuggling, and this is not one. So just being really concrete and giving those examples and normalizing the fact that people have differences.
Yeah, exactly. So using kind of like these story scripts to kind of talk with your child about what's going on. We often talk with kids in public school settings about, we use hugging as an example, right? Some people don't like hugs, some people do like hugs. Just because I like hugs doesn't mean that you like hugs. So for me to go and hug you and make an assumption about your comfort level isn't really respecting your boundaries and you as a person, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides, but kind of treating people how they want to be treated rather than assuming must be how you want to be treated, right? And that kind of ties into what respect looks like in relationships. What is respect, first of all, and how is it shown in relationships? Not just with people you want to date, but with family members, with friends, with teachers, with counselors, with whomever you may come into contact with. What does respect look like for you in a relationship? And defining those behaviors or those feelings or those thoughts, and kind of identifying those and saying, yeah, that's showing respect. Asking someone before you can hug them is the way we show respect in relationships with friends, with family members, with people we might want to date. So that kind of goes into using pictures or checklists may prove helpful, so social stories. So making specific concrete examples of, before you hug someone, you ask, may I give you a hug? Right, to kind of set those examples for these are ways in which we show respect for others. And that can also help, we'll talk a little bit more about later, but also that can help in defining who is an appropriate person to enter into a relationship with and who might not be. Right? And you also want to create opportunities to have an ongoing conversation. Rarely can relationships be summed up in one conversation that you have. It's kind of an ongoing process because teens grow up, they mature, they go through puberty, relationships change and evolve. And our society's standards change and evolve. So what may have been appropriate at one age may not be appropriate at another age. They may need more information or a different kind of information. Right, so you want to keep having this conversation rather than having it be like a one point, these are the rules, this is how you do it. You want to be kind of flexible and open with how you go about it because your teen may change their ideas and that you should normalize those and say that's okay to change your ideas.
I think the stereotypical idea of is like you sit your child down and you have the talk, right? But it should be something that you're bringing up like every time that you're consuming any sort of like media or seeing any sort of relationship in the world, right? It's an ongoing thing. So like after you watch a television show or a movie, like pausing it at different points and saying like, I'm having a reaction to what I just saw. I'm wondering like how you felt about that. Like, was that healthy? Was that not? Of course, like I'm slipping into like academic talk, academic speak. You would be talking on your kid's level, right? That was really scary for me. I wonder if that scared you, or I wonder how you felt about it, right? Getting at their level and talking to them about it that way.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you're communicating on the same wavelength, right? Sometimes, just an example, like as like academics, we tend to use different words than we use with kids, right? So we're using different language even now than we use with little kids when talking about boundaries, So it's important to make sure that you're on their level and communicating with them in a way that feels normal, that feels natural, that feels productive and useful. So now we're going to talk about your teens kind of wanting to begin a relationship. They're interested in going out with someone, they're interested in knowing what that feels like, right? So now we're going to talk about like the different levels of affection. So identifying what is an appropriate thing to do with someone on a first date versus someone you're in a committed relationship with for 10 years, right? So it may not be appropriate for that, maybe for that girl in class that you like, it may not be appropriate to go and kiss her while you're asking her out, right? That's probably not an appropriate thing to do. So identifying when is it appropriate? When is it okay to maybe hold someone's hand? How do you know if it's okay to hold someone's hand? Again, that'd be an example of, can I hold your hand? Making sure you ask the person before you go and do it. And this can also be applied to different people like in your lives. Like it's probably not appropriate to kiss your mailman on the cheek, unless you really know your mailman, right? So identifying with people, these are things that we can do with people that we know, that we're close with, and these are people that we want to have some distance between. It's okay to have distance between, and you can still be friendly with them, right? So define different levels of appropriate affection that makes sense within the situation. And also talking about signs of interest and disinterest. So how do you know if someone likes you? How do you know if someone is interested in having a conversation with you or talking with you more? Right, so identifying signs that maybe they're interested in you. So maybe they're making solid eye contact with you. They're turning to talk to you. They're facing you when you have a conversation. Their arms are crossed, they're open, they're asking questions about your life, right? Versus signs of disinterest. So maybe they're feeling uncomfortable, not really looking at you, their arms are crossed, they're looking away. They're saying things like, I don't want to talk to you right now. Right, so being able to identify, maybe they're interested in you, but these signs may be that they're not interested in you. And that's also important when we talk about identifying whether somebody wants to be friends with you or someone wants to date you, because those can be two different things. Not every person who smiles at you, who talks to you, who expresses interest in you, wants to date you. Right, so identifying what is it like for someone to express interest in you in a dating situation, and what is it like when they're just being friendly and nice to you. Right, and that kind of goes into the 3 strikes rule. Right, so maybe you're interested in someone, they're showing signs that they're at least interested in you on a friend level. So talking about how do you ask someone out? What does that look like? How would you like that to go? Right, so saying, I like you, would you like to go out to the movies with me? Using concrete examples of something that you could do together. If the person says no, I have something to do, that's okay, maybe another time, right? So maybe the teen goes up and asks again, I really like you, can we go to the movies together? Oh no, maybe later, I'm not really wanting to right now. Okay, that's okay, take a step back, approach another time. I still like you, can we go maybe do this instead? Oh, I'm not really wanting to right now, right? So after 3 times, after you ask someone out 3 times, that should be the point where you say, I don't think they're interested in dating me, right? If they say, oh, we can't right now, but can we go next week? That might be an indicator that they are interested in you, and so maybe set up for something for next week. But if the person's still being invasive, maybe take a step back and say, okay, this person might just want to be friends, might just want to be friends in school, right? We want to make sure that teens don't pursue somebody to the point where it makes them uncomfortable or feel embarrassed about it, right? Because that's not a good position to put someone in, right? So we generally go with the 3 strikes rule. If you ask them out 3 times and they still don't, they're evasive, they don't want to, that's okay, take a step back. And then talking about what that rejection looks like for teens, because that can be really hard to ask someone out, to get up the courage to go and say, I like you, will you go out with me? So talking about what rejection looks like and normalizing what it feels like. It doesn't feel great for someone to say, I'm not really interested in you, but talking about that and normalizing that, and it's okay to feel disappointed or upset, but how can we express that in a healthy way without making it about the other person, right? So we want to focus on what the teen's feeling rather than what this person did, right? Because it's okay to say no to somebody if you don't want to date them. And that's kind of the other flip side, talking with your teen about what do you do if somebody asks you out but you don't want to go out with them. You can say no, that's okay to do. So then identifying appropriate people to date, right? So ideally we're looking at people within the right age range, right? So dating your mailman may not be an appropriate person to date. Dating your teacher, counselor, probably definitely not appropriate people to date. So identifying people in your life that might be appropriate for your teen to date. Talking about age ranges. So, oh, that person in your class that you talk about a lot. Maybe are you interested in them in a romantic way? Would you like to spend more time with them? How would you like to spend your time with them? Right, so talking about people who are appropriate to date and normalizing those. And then if they do have some kind of crush on an older person, talking about that, saying, that's sometimes normal. But talking about it may not be appropriate to date them because of the roles and the positions that everyone's in. So also practicing social skills. Going out with someone, not only asking someone out, but going out with someone can be really nerve-wracking for some teens. So talking about what would you like your date to look like? How would your date go? What kind of things would you say? What would you talk about? What might you want to eat? What might you want to do after the date? Do you want to go get coffee, or do you want to come back home? So going and talking about how the date might look and practicing easy small talk conversations. Generally the rule is, for every question that you get asked, you ask a question back to the other person. So that not only is the conversation focused evenly, you're not monopolizing. So every time somebody asks you a question, you ask a question back after that. And so practicing that at home or in areas that you feel comfortable, or with friends maybe that the team feels comfortable with. Planning ahead is also great, but also practicing that, it may not look like how we practiced. Things may go differently. Maybe you thought you were going to go to one restaurant, but you actually went to another restaurant. Practicing that flexibility and knowing that it's okay if we change restaurants. How can we make that a good occasion? How can we adapt what we're doing, what we're talking about, to fit that location? Going to a movie versus going out to eat are kind of two different scripts, right? In the movies, you're supposed to be quiet, you can whisper quietly, maybe you share food, whereas a restaurant, you can probably talk louder, you have your own food. So how would those look compared to each other, and how can we adapt if one happens over another? This kind of goes back in, discuss rejection and emotions. So maybe your team goes on a date, and it just doesn't work out. The person isn't really interested anymore. Discuss how that feels, and normalize those emotions. Say it's okay to feel disappointed or rejected. That's normal, right? And then talking about how relationships may change over the course of time. So maybe the person your teen is dating, they like them, they fit together. How does that relationship differ from when they started a relationship to 3 months later? What's now appropriate 3 months later than wasn't appropriate at the beginning, right? So discussing maybe various levels of affection. So maybe there was holding hands at the first month, now the second month, maybe there's a kiss. So discussing how those relationships change, how boundaries may change in a relationship over the course of time, and kind of making sure that they're aware that things are going to change, and that's okay. Change can be really scary sometimes, but it can also be really good and really satisfying. So talking with them and preparing them for things may change, but that's okay. How can we change and help things along together?
All right, I'm going to talk about a bit about consent. So consent is something that's really clear cut, and people still get confused. So consent is only an active, enthusiastic, clear, informed yes. Anything that is not that is not consent, right? So a clear no is not consent, but also an I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure, that's not consent either, right? Informed is really important, right? And this is part of the reason we have ages of consent, because you have to be aware of the risks involved in different activities that somebody might be consenting to. And so different things that impact whether they're truly informed about what they're doing is important, okay? So consent is a conversation and a process. You can withdraw consent at any time. You can consent to one thing but not everything, right? Consenting to kiss is not consenting to have sex. Consenting to have sex one time isn't just blanket consent to have sex, anytime. And consent is important from small things like holding hands, any kind of physical touch, whether it be even between family members, right? Tickling or things that siblings might do, right? It starts within the family first, right? I always think about when we have small children and we tell them give your grandma a kiss, before we leave, and the child doesn't want to, they're scared, or they don't like physical affection, and you force that child to give grandma a kiss because it's rude not to. That conversation around consent is just important as when we're talking about sex, because they learn about consent then, and then that translates to, you know, how they're thinking about sex later on. So it's really important, like even with young children, to like ask them, you know, if they want to give you a hug and a kiss. You know, if they don't want to around friends, don't force them. And they can consent, you know, at different times. Like they can have whatever reason for like not wanting to do something, and you really want to make that okay, so that later on they feel okay about saying no, and you know, standing firm in what their boundaries are.
And consent is really helpful in any relationship, whether that be someone that you're related to or someone you're dating or someone you work with. So these are kind of transferable skills across the lifespan, you know? So you may act one way with a family member versus someone you're dating versus someone that you work with, right? So even this idea of, if you're in a workplace, can I borrow your scissors? May I borrow your scissors instead of just taking them because I need them at the moment, right? So these are skills that you can use throughout the lifespan and are really important because asking for someone's consent is how we show respect. We don't want to treat people how we want to be treated. We want to treat people how they want to be treated. So giving them the opportunity to say yes or no, giving the opportunity to decide what's best for them and what's best for their body or what's best for their belongings.
What's also important, like, you know, you want to do this with your child or teen, but also you can model it, you know, with other people in your household. So you, like a lot of adults who date or are married, you know, have been dating for a long time, or married, they're comfortable with each other, they might not, you know, it's very unusual to ask, like, can I have a kiss, or can I kiss you, when it's your spouse, right? You might be in a routine where, like, you just follow some sort of, you know, like agreed upon amount of affection. But if you have a child, you want to think about, like, if I were to make this explicit and ask, what am I teaching them? You know, they're going to know that that's something that that they can do. And it will be normalized so that they don't think that it's weird or awkward, right? When we go into schools with kids who are, you know, in 3rd grade, and we're telling them, you know, how would it feel to ask somebody if you could give them a hug? They're like, what? That's so weird. You know, that they would think I'm weird. And it's like, why is that weird? You know, that's respectful. So modeling is really important.
Yeah, and even when we go and talk to teens about consent, many teens we ask them, you know, is it okay if your partner kisses, hugs you, or holds your hands? And we kind of ask that at, you know, the beginning of the relationship, 3 months in, and then we ask, you know, 20 years in your marriage, is it okay for your partner to kiss you, hug you, hold your hand, whatever they want? Most kids say yes, that's okay, because of this idea we have about marriage and what marriage means. So it might be also important to say, you know, what does consent look like